Hello and welcome to new and returning viewers. Today I take a look at 4 of my favorite vampire stories. Panther may or may not be staying for the video. He already picked his favorite vampire story. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite vampire story is. I'll let you know mine at the end of the video and why I thought it was a great read. The first is Dracula. For me, it was the first vampire story that I read, and I very much enjoyed it. You can also tell that I've had this book for a while because I paid all of $1.95 when I purchased this book. I didn't buy it at a thrift store. That was what I paid when the book was brand new. So it tells you how long I've had this particular copy of Dracula. I first read Dracula in the 1970s. The story is about a European count in Romania looking to move to England. There's the creepy old castle element. Even though the story was written in 1897, there is a very strong female character, as in Mina. She's educated, she holds the group together, and she really is, in my opinion, the foundation of the story. So it was nice to read, especially when I was a teenager, a woman who was smart, strong, and independent. If you've watched my previous video, then you know the debate that my husband and I had about vampires in the daylight. He actually was right, but at least that debate motivated me to read Dracula again. Let me know in the comments down below if you remember whether Dracula could go out in the daylight. Unlike the Hollywood movies, which is why most stories about vampires have that whole you can't go out in the sunlight deal, in the book Dracula, he can go out in the sun, but his powers aren't as strong as at nighttime. So it was Hollywood that began the concept that vampires cannot go out in the sunlight without burning up. As an aside, I'll be taking a closer look in a future video about Vlad Tepes, the Romanian prince that the character of Count Dracula is based on. If you're interested in learning more about Vlad, a great read is In Search of Dracula. It's by Raymond T. McNally and Radu Florescu. Salem's Lot is the second vampire novel I read back in 1975 when it was first published by Stephen King. Yes, I am that old. This year, I read the story again. It's been over 40 years since I first read the story. Salem's Lot is classic Stephen King, going right up until the very end. I remember reading this as a teenager and when I was very much into reading fiction and horror stories, and I absolutely loved the book. I read it again this year, 40 years later, and although there were parts that I had forgotten over time, it was still very much an enjoyable read. Salem's Lot is about Ben Mears, an author who returns to his hometown, hoping to rent a particular mansion, put some of his past issues to rest, and get some inspiration for his new novel. Things take a nasty turn, as so often they do in a Stephen King novel, when two boys go into the woods and only one of them returns. Ben finds out that he's unable to rent the mansion as there is someone else who has taken ownership of it. Ben, along with a couple people that he has formed a friendship with since he's returned to Jerusalem's Lot, begin to piece together what is going on. Ben and his friends continue to monitor the situation from a distance because they know what they're dealing with is extremely powerful and they need to have plans carefully set. When they put their plan in place, unfortunately, and not surprising, things of course don't go as planned. Ben and a young boy named Mark are the two who survive. Ben continues to monitor the situation from a distance by watching the newspaper to see if anything is mentioned or other events have happened in Jerusalem's lot. When there is a news story reported about Jerusalem's lot, he realizes that he will have to return to deal with the events that occurred there. Ben and Mark return to Jerusalem's lot for their final battle against the vampire. If you enjoy Stephen King novels, Goodreads is a great place to hang out. I belong to a Stephen King book club where there are a number of wonderful people who post comments about the different books. The third vampire novel that I've read was Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, published in 1976. And because I definitely enjoyed reading Salem's Lot, yes, I did read Interview in 1976. Lestat is a very different vampire from Count Dracula and Mr. Barlow in Salem's Lot. I found this story interesting because it's told from the point of view from the vampire versus the humans that interact with them. He also reminds me quite a bit of Stefano from The Vampire Diaries. Interview with the Vampire has three main characters. We have Louise, who shares his story with a reporter. We meet Lestat, who comes up throughout the chronicles. We meet Claudia, the child vampire that Lestat creates for Louise as a companion. Louise talks at length about Claudia, as well as the fact that he wanted to find other vampires and try to understand how it was that he had become a vampire. Unfortunately, although they do end up meeting other vampires, it has some very dire consequences for the child vampire Claudia. I haven't read the entire series, although I did read quite a few of the novels as they were coming out, but it's been a number of years since I've read them. Have you read the Vampire Chronicles? If so, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know your thoughts and whether you think it's something that I should invest my time in reading. The fourth vampire story that stands out for me is Mark by PC Cast and Kristen Cast. Marked is book one in the House of Night series. There are 12 books altogether, and again, I'm grateful to my public library because although I purchased the first book, I borrowed the other 11 from my public library. They were a fairly quick read. I read part of this series about 10 years ago. I got up to book 4 at that time. For whatever reason, I didn't continue on with it. It may have been when I was starting to transition more from the occasional fiction book to focusing specifically on nonfiction, personal development, archaeology, ancient civilizations. So I decided that as I was taking a look at vampires, I finished all 12 books in the series. Basically, the House of Night is a vampire school. In this particular series, there's some type of genetic factor in whether someone's going to become a vampire or not. The change takes place at the age of 16. The other vampires go and bring the new fledgling, as they're called, to the school. There is a transition period that lasts for a few years to go from fledgling to full vampire, and not all of them make the transition. Another factor in the series is that the fledglings need to be somewhere near full vampires. If they're away from them for too long, then the change won't happen successfully. So there's a real sense of community and having to stay together. What I found interesting about this series, both when I read it a number of years ago and during this reading, is that although it's about vampires and a vampire school, you'll actually learn more about pagans. If you've read the series, let me know if you figured out what it was about some people who, when they turned 16, became vampires, while other people didn't. The House of Night is a 12-book series. It covers a 1-year period, which I found a bit bizarre considering some of the massive events that occur. It follows a group of teenagers as they deal with transitioning from fledglings to full vampires, a couple of evil adversaries, as well as different beings. The events are very fast moving and they flow from one month to the next. But personally, I found it very hard to believe that teenagers could go through some of these major events. And that's not a commentary on a teenager's ability to cope. It is a commentary on the fact that throughout this series, there are some very huge life altering events. There are characters who die, and within a few months, those left behind are carrying on. So to me, I get that it's a fictional series about fictional vampires, but I don't think losing a partner is something you're just going to get over in a couple of weeks. And certainly not as a teenager, and certainly not as an adult. There are a few things that I really didn't enjoy about the series. So although, yes, I like the concept of the vampire school and the community and the bonds of friendship and sticking together, one thing that I did enjoy about the series is the character development and the changes. Not only of Zoe, our main character and heroine in the series, but a number of the other characters as well. I have to admit, the main character, Zoe, is definitely not my favorite. And she was part of the reason, now that I think about it, why I stopped reading the series in the first place. And I'm not quite sure what it is. Personally, I found Stevie Ray to be far more likable, perhaps because she was the one who befriended Zoe when she came to school, so someone who was very welcoming. And throughout the series, Stevie Ray is very upbeat and positive. There is a period where that isn't true because of some of the changes and events that happen. But at her core, Stevie Ray is that best friend that you want to stand beside you. She'll be there regardless of what goes on. She isn't going to judge or walk away when the going gets tough. And maybe that's what it was about Zoe, because although I get that there was a lot put on her shoulders at a very young age, she doesn't have that same positive, let's get this done viewpoint. One of the things that I really didn't enjoy or quite frankly understand is that the character of Raphael makes a major transformation. And I'm trying to describe things without giving any spoilers. Raphael, a character that we meet later in the series, once he's made a major transition and different changes, he isn't given human form permanently. To me as a reader, that seemed only as a partial forgiveness. And quite frankly, considering all the things that Raphael ends up going through, it really didn't make sense to me why he wasn't given full forgiveness and allowed to stay in human form. Overall, the writing style is easy to read. There's a lot of character development and different events. The book is filled with romance and intrigue and mystery. For the most part, the series was an enjoyable read. And there are a lot of interesting twists and turns throughout the series. I am glad that I did finish all 12 books because it did answer some questions, certainly from the first 4 books. It was nice to see the characters develop and grow and come into their own by the end of the series. I also liked that at the end of the series, things were wrapped up instead of left hanging. Do you have a favorite vampire story? Let me know down in the comments below. Have you read any of the vampire stories that I've mentioned? Let me know down in the comments below. Panther let me know his favorite vampire story. Panther, do you have a favorite book? Okay, so actually he picked two. Comically, the first one he picked was In Search of Dracula. My favorite vampire book was Dracula, for a number of different reasons. One, because it was the first vampire story I read. So there are a lot of great memories, different things that were happening when I was reading the novel as a teenager. I especially appreciated the character of Mina, who, as I mentioned, was educated, independent, organized, and really keeping people together. If you enjoy reading vampire stories, be sure to check out Goodreads, where you can find comments about the different stories. They also have a vampire book club. If you're on Goodreads, feel free to send me a friend request, as I'm always looking for like-minded people to connect with and looking for my next good read, and I'm interested in what other people are reading. Until next time, happy reading!